As the government focuses on the fight against COVID-19, what political climate has the pandemic created and how do opposition parties fit in this new reality? Joining me now to talk about this is DA spokesperson Malatsi. Soli, good evening. Thank you so much for your time tonight. There does appear to be some viewers that are concerned, and also an analyst I spoke to just a short while ago, Professor William Gumede, who do think that the opposition parties are confused during this time.
Absolutely not. But let me start by greeting your viewers and you. I think what the pandemic has done is to showcase the gap between the official opposition and the rest of the opposition, because what has been very clear is that very few parties have been as proactive, have been as eloquent and as creative in putting proposals on the table regarding how to alternatively best manage the response to the pandemic, but also constantly keeping government accountable. I mean, the DA was very upfront from the onset at the first meeting that the president held with the leaders of opposition parties in terms of providing the support, which at the time was the right thing to do, because the country and the rest of the world was in uncharted territory. But also it was support in good faith, hoping that government's actions would be guided by the expert advice that it sought it would seek, but most importantly, also opening the door for various sectors, including the opposition, to put alternatives on the table. However, as the coronavirus has spread through the country and the introduction of the lockdown and subsequent to that, what has been very clear is that the government has been very much more strong-willed towards curtailing civil liberties, all in the name of the lockdown, but also not listening to expert advice that it thought it would pursue. It is what has driven the DA in the first instance to propose the risk adjustment strategy, which government belatedly adopted. It is what also drove the DA into instituting court action on two key things. One being the challenge to the Minister of Social Development when she was attempting to stop non-governmental organizations and institutions which have been working in the social development sector to provide food to poor people, and it took the threat of court action by the Democratic Alliance in order to overturn that nonsensical decision. In addition to that was also the introduction of the first curfew and also the limitation on hot food, which could be sold and not be sold at the time. All the while, the other opposition parties have been nowhere to be found, because it has clearly shown that other than being present in Parliament, they've got no other means of matching and coming up with the solutions that would showcase their viable alternative to governing this country. And if you go further down to where the DA governs in the Western Cape, I mean, we've been very proactive there in making sure that there is a lot of focus on contract tracing, on testing, on making sure that the preparatory work is done so that when the country, and more in particular the Western Cape, reached the peak, it had the sufficient number of hospital beds that it needed, and that it was doing sufficient tests in order to make sure that we've got accurate results that guide each and every action that comes across with that.
But it is the same province of the Western Cape where we saw some most inhumane evictions of some citizens.
Yeah, look, I mean, there is a fair point you made about the nature of that eviction that I think you are alluding to was totally unacceptable. The key thing is that when the law is being enforced, it needs to be enforced with the dignity that our Constitution makes provision for, and most importantly, it needs to be done in a fair and just manner.
And let's talk then about, what some South Africans have said to us, particularly after we posed this poll question. It does look like a resounding number of them are asking, what has the party done for, those on the ground, particularly when it comes to feeding of the poor, and not about the court challenge to then take the social development to court and to also challenge the lockdown regulations. How many people has the DA fed during this pandemic?
I think in all fairness, we've done fairly well. It is key to remember that the beneficiaries of the provision of food by NGOs and soup kitchens are poor people. So the beneficiaries of the court action that was initiated by the DA are vulnerable and indigent people across the board who, without access to those meals, would be going hungry.
But let's put the court challenge aside. What has the DA done? How many food parcels has the DA delivered to even people of Khayelitsha, to people of, various informal settlements around the country that have not been able to afford a meal? Not about a court challenge. What has been happening on the ground?
Sure. I think it is important in answering to that question not to isolate action. Those form part of the broader action that the Western Cape government has done. The Western Cape government, under a DA administration, has made sure that we continue to feed the poor, the vulnerable that are in the province, and secondly, that the health workers have sufficient PPEs so that they can do the work that protects and limits the spread of the virus in these vulnerable communities. So all this action culminates to the benefit of vulnerable and poor people, because the cumulative effect of it is that it goes down to those residents.
Are you fixated on the government of the day, or could you work together?
Sorry?
Are you fixated on opposing the government of the day, or do you think you can work together? Those are some of the questions the viewers are asking tonight.
I think the summation of that question on itself is inaccurate, because we have been fixated on being proactive throughout the lockdown, both in opposition and in government where we govern. And through those examples that I've alluded to you, it has showcased that where the need has arose for us to hold the government accountable, and where the need has arose to us to even go the further mile by going to court, because in each and every instance where we ended up going to court, we were proactive in trying to engage government, and where government was not reciprocating the constructive spirit of our input, we have resorted to the cause.
And Soli, do you think that, let's say, the issue of corruption has been resolved, because a lot of people are complaining about this, and really, it has been quite concerning to see some of the corruption that we have been seeing. Do you think there's a possibility here of seeing all political parties uniting in order to ensure that South Africans do beat the scourge of this pandemic?
Absolutely, but I think it is also important to let those who are responsible for the spread of corruption to face the full might of the law. And it would be unfair to say, like,